I'm happy to be here again, and it has become somewhat of a tradition for me to say a shiur at the yortzeit of Reb David ben Menachem Monush, who was Seth's late father. And the title we learn today should be Le'ilui Nishmosoi. He left behind such a beautiful family and such a beautiful legacy for the family. And the title we learn should be Le'ilui Nishmosoi. Also, Refuah Shalema for Shalamis Bas Batya, Sharav Refuah Shalema, and the Shloishim for Rabbi Elazar Meir ben Reb Mordechai Pinchas. This week is the Shloishim, and the title we learn should both be Le'ilui Nishmosam and Refuah Shalema, and so many others that need a Refuah Shalema. Klal Yisrael knows a lot of pain and a lot of young soldiers that were badly hurt. Shakadosh Baruch Yishlach Refuahs and Yeshuas. So today was a Chodesh Adar, and it would only be natural we should speak about Purim HaMeshulesh, and Beit Shemesh you don't have Purim HaMeshulesh as we have in Yerushalayim. But bearing in mind I've been coming here for years, and it's always about Purim, I decided today, let's speak about Va'osili Migdosh V'shulchanti B'soicha, mitzvah of Asiyas Beis HaMikdash. And we will also have a brief overview of the discussions throughout the ages, discussions which reflect really Tzipiso Yeshua. Could we be Makrav Korbanos Bizman Hazeh, even before we were Zeicher to Binyan Beis HaMikdash? V'yosili Migdosh V'shulchanti B'soicham. There's a fundamental machlokes between the Rambam and the Ramban in Sefer HaMitzvahs. The Rambam, Mitzvahs HaSeichof, maintains that the mitzvah V'yosili Migdosh V'shulchanti B'soicham includes the Klei HaMikdash, Mishkan V'Keilav. It is not only about erecting the building, the structure, V'yosili Migdosh. This mitzvah includes the Klei HaMikdash as well. The Ramban in Mitzvahs Asay Lamed Gimel, which is actually the Mitzvahs Asay of Big Day Kahuna, the Ramban disagrees with the Rambam, and the Ramban maintains V'yosili Migdosh is only the Beis HaMikdash. That is what we call Migdash. That is what the Mishkan was. And the mitzvah to make the Kalim is derived from the mitzvah to avoida that we do in each and every one of the Kalim. So if we have a mitzvah of Atovas Vadlokas Neiras HaMenorah, that would necessitate making the Menorah. And if we have a mitzvah of Shnei Tamidim B'Kol Yom, that would necessitate the Mizbeach HaChitzon. Mitzvah HaKtoros includes the mitzvah of Mizbeach HaKtoros, Mizbeach HaPnimi. Lechem HaPonim would necessitate making a Shulchan. So the Klei HaMikdash, the mitzvah to do the Kalim, actually is derived from this specific avodas that we are supposed to do with each and every one of those Kalim. But the V'yosili Migdash only refers to the Beis HaMikdash, and that is a fundamental machlokes Rambam and Ramban. And as we move forward in today's shiur, we will see that this machlokes also manifests itself in different areas. So, in Minchas Osher, and Baruch Hashem, many people in this community have the Minchas Osher, and I have a special thank you for Seth Grossman. There's a new sefer that I just brought that came out Erev Shabbos, and such a simcha for me that the sefer is available for the yortzeit, because my dear friend, Reb Shloime, what is your Hebrew name? Reb Shloime something. Reb Shloime Zev sponsored Minchas Osher Bovakama. First chelik and second chelik I just got on Friday. So it was Min HaShemayim that the sefer is available to your father's yortzeit. So Minchas Osher and Parshas Truma I explained. I think the Rambam and the Ramban have a fundamentally different approach. What is the Mishkan all about? What is the Beis Mikdash all about? The Rambam defines the Beis Mikdash in that very same source, Mitzvahs Asay Chof, in Sefer HaMitzvahs. Livnois bayis la'avoida. Bias la'avoida. And in the very first halacha in Hilchas Beis Abchira, Perek Aleph, Halacha Aleph, Hilchas Beis Abchira, the Lashon of the Rambam is, Mitzvah Sesei Torah, Livnei Bias, Muchan lihiyois makrivim boi Korbanos. Bias Muchan lihiyois makrivim boi Korbanos. So the Rambam in both sources, in Mishnah Torah, as one in Sefer HaMitzvahs, defines the Beis HaMikdash. Bias la'avoida. Bias Muchan lihiyois makrivim boi Korbanos. The Rambam l'shitosoi, without a mizbeach, then the bias is useless. It is void. It cannot be a bias la'avoida without the kalim with which we do the avoida. And if the definition of the Beis HaMikdash is bias la'avoida, livnois bias muchan lios makrivim boi Korbanos, goes without saying that this mitzvah of Yossi l'Mikdash would include the Klei HaMikdash. The Ramban, at the very beginning of Parshas Truma, Ramban al Torah, explains the essence of the Beis HaMikdash. Harav steps in place of Har Sinai. Kvoid Hashem and the Eish, the fire that was at Sinai by Ma'amad Har Sinai by Kabbalas Torah, moves from Har Sinai to Har HaMoriah. And the Eish, Tomid, Tukad al Mizbeach, that is the Eish of Har Sinai. The Ramban doesn't define in 2 words what is the Beis HaMikdash about. My guess, my suggestion, if we would ask the Ramban, so how do you define the Beis HaMikdash? 2 words, not more. The Ramban would say, Beis Shechina. Not Bayis La'avoida, but Beis Shechina. Kvoid Hashem, Sheshochan al Hahar, transferred from Har Sinai to Har HaMoriah. Avoido milta achrita. Shechina l'chod and avoida l'chod. Now, well, it would be reasonable to argue, but without the avoid, there would be no Shechina. Maybe yes, maybe no. But even if we assume that without the avoid, there would be no Shechina, but the definition, the essence of the Beis HaMikdash is not only machshirei mitzvah. It is not only to have a bias to do the avodah. The essence of the Beis HaMikdash is the continuity of Shechina, which we were zoiche by Har Sinai, by Kabbalas Torah, and Kabbalas Torah is a one-time event. The Kotzker Rebbe said, Matan Torah was one time, Kabbalas Torah could be every day. So the Shechina and Kvoid Hashem, Sheshur and Har Sinai, goes over to Har HaMoriah. And the Beis HaMikdash essentially is a Beis Shechina, and therefore the Ramban maintains the Yossi l'Mikdash is the Beis HaMikdash. Asiyas HaKelim is derived from another source. The avodah which we make with each and every one of the kelim, that necessitates a kelim. How about the oroin? There is no avodah that we make with the oroin. And in Bayis Sheni, we did exactly the same avodas in Bayis Rishon, even though there was no oroin. According to the Ramban, Asiyas oroin is a mitzvah bifnei atzmoi. And once again, the Ramban l'shitosoi. Because if the mitzvah of Asiyas HaKelim is derived from the avodas HaKelim, that would not be relevant to the oroin. What about the Mizbeach? We'll get to the Mizbeach soon. The Ravid maintains Mizbeach is a mitzvah bifnei atzmoi. Mizbeach HaChitzen, and we will get to it. The tzivui to make the Mizbeach is not in Parshas Truma, but at the end of Parshas Mishpotim. Mizbach avonim ta'asoli v'zavachta ola v'soilosecho v'eshlomecho. That is even before we had the mitzvah of Yossi l'Mikdash v'shuchanti b'soichom. We got the mitzvah to make a mizbeach and be makriv korbanos. So according to the Ravid, Asiyas HaMizbeach is a mitzvah into itself. It is not an essential part of the Beis HaMikdash. So the question is, what is V'Yossi l'Mikdash v'shuchanti b'soichom? Does that include the kelim or not? In Haggadah Shel Pesach, and we are approaching Purim. 1 month after Purim, we have Pesach, and we say, Uvonu lanu beis hamikdash lechaper al kol avonoseinu. And that would support the Rambam's approach. It is all about the avodas. Ubonu lanu beis hamikdash lechaper al kol avonoseinu. Kaporas avonos is the Korbanos, not the etzem beis hamikdash. So that would support the Rambam's approach that the bias essentially is a bias lavoido, bias mochan riois makrivim boy Korbanos. Yerushalmi, at the beginning of the second parak of Masechet Brochos, David HaMelech so longed to build the Beis HaMikdash. He dedicated his life to build the Beis HaMikdash, and then Kodesh Baruch Hu tells him, no, it shall not be. You will not have the schus to build the Beis HaMikdash. Shloime Bincha, he's going to build the Beis HaMikdash. And David was really disappointed and broken. And a Kodesh Baruch Hu tells him, Klum osid Shloime Bincha livnois Beis HaMikdash elo lahakrov boy Korbanos. Toiv lefonai, your mitzvahs and masim toivim, mekol hakorbanos she'osid Shloime Bincha lahakriv. And this Ma'amar Chazal, this Yerushalmi, once again proves Pashtus Aloshon, Klum Shloime Bincha Osed Livnois Beis HaMikdash Elo Lahakrav Boy Korbanos. So both what we say in Haggadah Pesach and the Yerushalmi seem to substantiate the Rambam's definition of the Beis HaMikdash. Bayis Muchan, Leas Makrivim Korbanos. And that is what Kodesh Baruch Hu tells David HaMelech. Don't be depressed, don't be distressed. What you're doing is more important to me than all the Korbanos that your son Shloime will be makrib in the Beis HaMikdash. Klum Shloime Bincha Osed Lahak in the Rivnis Beis HaMikdash. Elo Liois Makriven Boy Korbanos. Is there a possibility to be makrib Korbanos even before we have a Beis HaMikdash? In the foreseeable future, B'derech HaTeva, we don't see a possibility to build a Beis HaMikdash. We all wait every day for the Geula Shleima, and we will have a Beis HaMikdash. By crook, we don't know exactly how it'll come to be, but we'll have a Beis HaMikdash. Is there a possibility to be makrav Korbanos before we have the Beis HaMikdash? And this depends. Is there Kedushas HaMikdash b'zman hazeh? And that is a machlokes in the Gemara, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya. Zvochem kuv zayin mit beis, makriven afal pi she'ein bayis. We do not need a Beis HaMikdash to be makrav Korbanos. All we need is a mezbeach in the proper place. But we do not need a Beis HaMikdash. And that is the psak of the Rambam. Perek Vav, halacha tes vav of Hilchas Beis HaBechira, halacha ki Rabbi Yeshua, makriven afal pi she'ein bayis. And that is where the Ravid disagrees. And that is somewhat of a strange Ravid. And I wrote extensively about this. I do not think it is already printed in my Svarim, but after writing 35 Svarim, and after being an old man, I no longer remember everything I have printed, and I don't remember whether this was published or not. Because as much Torah is contained in those 35 Svarim, there's much more that is still waiting to be printed. But the Ravid writes in Perek Vav Beis HaBechira, the Rambam is not right. And we can't be makrav Korbanos only when we'll build the Beis HaMikdash. V'kvar niglo soid Hashem liyareyav. 3 different places the the Ravid refers to Ruach HaKodesh. In Hilchas Lulav he writes, Kvar hofia Ruach HaKodesh bebeis midroshenu. And in Perek Vav Hilchas Bechira, and this halacha the Rambam paskins, like Rabbi Yeshua, makriven afal pi she'ein bayis, the Ravid comments, Soid Hashem liyarev kvar nigla, the Rambam is not right. And somebody that walks into Mokum HaMikdash today, Betuma, is not chayev koros. That's what the Ravid writes. According to the Rambam, chayev koros. Because Kedushas HaMikdash is intact. Nothing has changed. And that is why we could be makrav Korbanos. The Ravid says, kvar nigla soid Hashem liyarev. And the Radbaz is somewhat cynical, a little bit sarcastic. And the Radbaz writes, I don't doubt the Ruach HaKodesh of the Ravid, but still, I wouldn't take chances. You're right. I would prefer staying outside. I wouldn't take a chance. Not that I question what the Ravid writes, but I would still stay away, and I wouldn't take a chance. So this is the machlekes the Rambam and the Ravid. And because the Shulchan Aruch doesn't deal with mitzvah shebemigdash, there is no clear hachra who is right, the Rambam or the Ravid. The Tur and the Shulchan Aruch, who are the later poskim, don't deal only with mitzvahs hanoeges bisman hazeh. So this question ultimately is a machlokes Rambam and Ravid. She'ila Siavetz, Rabbi Yankov Emdin, going back more than 250 years, Chelek Aleph Siman Pei Tet, wants to prove that we were makrev Korbanos la'achar churban beis hamikdash, and therefore the Rambam must be right. There are three sources in Shas which clearly seem to tell the story la'achar churban beis hamikdash, and we still were makrev Korbanos. Sanhedrin Yud Aleph Omed Beis. Chazal deal with Kiddush HaChodesh. What are the reasons that justify Ibur HaChodesh? Adding on another month, Ibur HaShona, rather, not Kiddush HaChodesh. What justifies adding on a new month? And the Gemara tells the story of a letter that Rabban Gamliel wrote to Bnei HaGolus. And he writes, Imraya Dekikin, the animals are still too small. They're not big enough. We need to wait. And Rashi explains, we need to wait for the animals to grow because otherwise they're too small, you can't be a makrev Korbanos. And that is why we decided in Eretz Yisrael, writes Rabban Gamliel to Bnei HaGoyla to add on another month before Pesach. Rabban Gamliel is Rabban Gamliel Diavne, usually, and he was la'achar chorban beis hamikdash. And this proves that he was in the time of Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Gamliel even younger than Rabbi Kiva. It is not Rabbi Gamliel Azoken. And so this proves there were makrev Korbanos la'achar chorban beis hamikdash. So Rabbi Yankov then doubts this raya, and he says, Lecha this proves they were makrev korban pesach liachar chorban beis hamikdash, but maybe the tzapiyah Yeshua was so great, and they hoped every day, especially as long as Bar Kochva, Ben Koziva, was still fighting the Romans, and they hoped with all their hearts that the tide will turn and our armies will be victorious and will restore the Beis HaMikdash, and they made all the preparations to be able to be makrev korban pesach. So maybe this Gemara doesn't prove that they actually were makrev korbanos. Today we have Chidush Aran, a Masechet Sanhedrin, and that is exactly what Chidush Aran writes. He asked this very same question. In the days of Rabban Gamliel, it was liachar korban habayis. So were there makrev korbanos? And he said they were prepared and they hoped, and that is why they decided to be ma'aberes Hashona. Be'ezes Hashem Yisborach, we will be able to be makrev korbanos. Psochamayim Daled Amud Aleph. Another story of Rabban Gamliel, the same Rabban Gamliel. Masa Rabban Gamliel she'omer tovi avdoi. Rabban Gamliel had an Eved, a very famous Eved, probably the most famous Eved in history, because there are few Gemaras that tell the stories of Rabban Gamliel and Tovi Avdoi. And Brochas Mem Zayin, he had 9 people, he wanted a minyan, he was Meshachar, his Eved Tavi Avdoi. And Rabban Gamliel tells Tavi Avdoi, Tzei utzlei lanu korban pesach. So this is not only preparing animals if the Beis HaMikdash will be destroyed, he actually tells them to do tzliya, to do the korban pesach. And once again, Rabban Gamliel, that had an Eved named Tavi, is Rabban Gamliel Yavne, who was a great grandson of Rabban Gamliel Hazoken. So, once again, and here we cannot suggest the other Mahalach of the Shilas Yavetz. They were just hoping there will be a Beis HaMikdash when it says Tzlei Lanu. The Rashash, on the spot, has a very interesting comment, and he said that in the non-Jewish history books, it is told that at some stage Ben Koziba, in Yerushalmi he is called Ben Koziba, in Bavli he is Bar Kochva, Shimon Bar Kochva, who was a commander of the Jewish armies fighting the Romans, and he was successful in chasing the Romans out of Yerushalayim and restoring the Avodah for some while. So the Rashash says, according to this tradition, according to this story, maybe in the days of Rabbi Gamliel, those were the days in which Bar Kochva still was fighting the Romans. Those were the days of Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva hoped, Rabbi Akiva said that Bar Kochva is Melech HaMoshiach, as we find in the Yerushalmi at the end of Masechet Tanis. But the Rashash himself says, in our sources, we have no indication that the Yachachor Mabayis, Ben Koziba, overcame the Romans in Yerushalayim. It is nowhere to be found in our sources. And I'm not aware whom he's quoting, but that's what the Rashash writes in Psuchim, Daf Ayin Daled. Beit Sechov Beis, we learned that Rabbi Gamliel had a minig to eat the Gdima Kulas, Beleil Pesach. And that is what Toidos Ishroimi did in Masechet Psachim. And he was told, Ilemolo Toidos Ato, we would put you into Shamta, we would be Menade. Rabbi Gamliel had that minig. And maybe that is what they called Pesach. It was Zecher LePesach, as Rashi writes in Masechet Beitza Chav Beis. Explanation number 3, or suggestion number 3 would be, in Nidid of Gimel Amud Beis, in Yerushalmi, Beis Rabban Gamliel called their Avodim Tavi, and their Shifchois Tavto. So there was more than one Tavi. Beis Rabban Gamliel probably started off with Rabban Gamliel Azoken, and that was a tradition in this family. But Beis Rabban Gamliel, they were rich, they were the Nesiim, they probably had many Avodim, and the Yerushalmi says they used to call their Avodim Tavi. So the famous Tavi was Rabban Gamliel Diavna, but this story might have been Rabban Gamliel Azoken, who still was in the days of the Beis Hamikdash. Source number 3, before we go into a more halachic discussion, is the most famous source, Daf Gimel Amud Beis, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. So a guy, a non-Jew, tells Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, you know, your Pesach tastes very well. Every year I go to Yerushalayim and I take part, and I'm part of a chavura, and I eat Korban Pesach. And Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira is very disturbed. Kol orel lo yoichal boy. So he gives him an eitzah. Next time to Yerushalayim, ask to have the tail, you know, because the Pesach has no tail. And then that person that falsified his identity, and that's a crime in the modern world, and he appeared as a Jew, and he asked, I would like to have the tail, and the people in Yerushalayim say, what is this about? Doesn't he know what the Korban Pesach is? And so they started to do research. They asked, your ID, please. Do you have a driver's license? Could we see who you are? And it became apparent that he's a guy, and he was executed. So once again, when was Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira? And this is not about preparation for Korban Pesach, but rather Korban Pesach. Maratz Chias in his Tshuvas, Chelik Beis, Simen Hey, being the Yalkut Shemoni, that Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira gave a bracha to the father of Shmuel, the great Amoyre Shmuel. Rav and Shmuel were the very first generation of Ameroim. Rabbi Yochanan and Shlokesh were Ameroi Eretz Yisrael. Rav and Shmuel, Rav Tanahu Vepalig. So the Gemara says Rav had the status of a Tana, but he is considered the very first generation of Ameroim. And he was born by a bracha of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. So according to this Yalkut, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira was in the last generation of Tanuim, and that was many years la'achar Chorban Beis Hamikdash. So how do we understand the story of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira? And I want to intensify this kasha. Chachamim said, At benetziven u'metzedosach prusa al Yerushalayim. So he was at his prime when this story happened. He was not a young man. It was not when he was very young. Tosfos asks, how come he wasn't Toilet Regel? What is he doing in Etzivin when the Makar of Korban Pesach? There's a mitzvah of Aliyah Regel. Two terutzim in Tosfos. One teretz is he was old and he couldn't make the trip. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira was old, and there were Makar of Korban Pesach in his time, and Shmuel the Amoira was born because he gave a bracha to his father. How does it fit in with Korban Pesach? Tosfos Menucha Samachei writes, there were more than one Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. If there are more than one, there might have been more than two. Who knows? So there was a Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira in the days of the Beis Hamikdash. So we do not have any conclusive proof from these three sugis in Shas. They actually were makrev korbanos la'achar chorban Beis Hamikdash. But this is a major discussion. And it depends, first of all, on the machlokes Rambam and Ramban. Could we be makrev? Is there kedushas Hamikdash? Kaftoy v'ferach was in the days of the Rishonim, one of the Gedolei Eretz Yisrael, and he quotes Reb Baruch. We don't know exactly who that was, one of the Rebbeim of the Kaftoy v'ferach, whose name was Reb Ashturi HaParchi. That was the Kaftoy v'ferach. Rabbi Yechiel MeParis, who was one generation before Rashi, initiated Hakrovas Korbanos in Yerushalayim. We don't know anything more about the story, but the Kaftoy v'ferach was one of the Gedolei Eretz Yisrael, writes that we have a Mesoidus. Then in the days of Rashi, we do not have any other sources about this. One of the Rishonim, Rabbi Yechiel MeParis, initiated, and he tried to have permission from whoever was in charge in those days in Yerushalayim to be makrev Korban Pesach. It didn't work out. 200 years ago, Reb Tzvi Hersh Kalisher, who was a Talmud of Rabbi Kiva Eger, wrote a sefer called Drishas Tziyod, and he said, we need to try to be makrev Korban Pesach. And he actually negotiated with the Ottoman Empire, with the Turks, who were in charge of Yerushalayim in those days, and he negotiated getting permission to be makrev Korban Pesach. And that sparked a huge discussion and controversy. And many kuntreisim were written, pro and con, for and against. So Reb Tzvi Hersh Kalisher wrote Drishas Tzion, encouraging people to come to Yerushalayim and be makrev Korban Pesach. Reb Chaim Natanzon, not very well known, but at the same time wrote a kuntres against this idea, b'shem avoida tamo. Generation later, Reb David Mekarlin, who was one of the greatest gedolim in Lithuania, Reb David Friedman was his name, and he wrote a kuntres Drishas Tzion v'Yerushalayim. Reb Hesh Pesach Frank summed it all up many years later in his Sefer Migdash Melech, and this was a huge discussion at the time. What is most interesting is a correspondence that we find between two Gedolim. One is one of the greatest Gedolim in Hungary, and the other in Galicia. Reb Mendele Medeish. He was a Rebbe, a Hasidic Rebbe, but also a Godel B'Yisrael, and he wrote a few Sforim. Shalas Etshuvas Shari Tzedek, Siman Kuv Beis and Siman Kuv Daled. And he writes, I dreamed, I had a dream, why we can't be makrev Korbanos Bezman Hazeh. And he takes his dream very seriously. In Minchas Osher and Chumash Bereshis, I do not remember which siman, but it is somewhere towards the end of the Sefer, Minchas Osher and Bereshis, there's a big discussion about how important dreams are and how valid is what you dream. And I brought many sources from Gedolei Rishonim that actually dreamed about Piskei Halacha. And I think it's a fascinating discussion. Anybody that has real nice dreams, it's kedai to learn the Minchas Osher. I think it's in Parshas Meketz. I also dream sometimes Divrei Torah, but I never share them in my shiurim. And the reason I don't share them, I don't think they'll bring me a lot of COVID. I think I think people will stop taking me seriously if I would share with you the divrei Torah that I dream up. But anyway, Shari Tzion, Shalas Tshuvas, Reb Mendele Medesh, Simon Kuf Daled writes, I dreamed, V'bo Elai B'chalom, that it is impossible to be Makrav Korbanos Manazeh for a very simple reason. Because you don't need a Beis HaMikdash according to the Rambam, but you do need a Mizbeach. Mizbach Avonim Tas Uliv, V'veisa Ola V'solesech V'shloimecha. So Tumah Hutra B'tzibur. Korban Tzibur is Doiche Tumah. But Binyan HaMizbeach is not Doiche Tumah. And we can't go into Mokum HaMikdash to build a Mizbeach because we're all Tumei HaMeis. So even though we pass in a Korban Tzibur is Doiche Tumah, but Binyan HaMizbeach is only Machshirei Korban, and that is not Doiche Tumah. So we can never build a Mizbeach in Mokum HaMikdash because without Efer Porah, we cannot purify ourselves from Tumas Meis. So all those throughout the ages that argued we could be Makav Korbanos Bezman Hazeh, based, number one, on the halacha that Korban Tzibur Doiche Tumah. Number two, the Rambam Paskins, Makriv and Afar Pisha, Ein Bias, all you need is a Mizbeach, but how would we build a Mizbeach for Tmei HaMeis? Does it justify an Issa Koros, Tmei HaMeis coming into Mokum HaMikdash to build a Mizbeach? We only find Tumah Tzibur is Akrovas HaKorbanos, but not Asiyas HaMizbeach.
Build a Mizbeach outside and drop it down in a helicopter.
No, it needs to be. The Mizbeach HaChitzon is a Mizbach Avonim. It is part of the building. It's not a Mizbach HaZohav that could just be dropped down. So the question is, could we build a Mizbeach Bo B'yom and Bo B'yom be Makar the Korban? Well, that would take somewhat of an effort. Obviously, they understood it's impossible. Because first of all, we need mumchim to clearly verify where exactly the Mokum HaMizbeach is, and then the building materials, and so maybe today with robotics, maybe. However, V'yosi L'mikdash, Chazal say Li L'shmi. So this would be a huge discussion when you use robots. Would that be defined as Lishma? So we're back to machine matzahs. So when you have machines and electricity doing something for you, would that be defined lishma? Could you use those matzahs for a matzahs mitzvah? I think we have some time before discussing machine matzahs, so we'll leave that for another opportunity. So the fundamental discussion is, Asiyas HaMizbeach, is that Doiche Tumah? Rabbi Yitzchak Aaron Ettinger was the Rav of Lemberg in Galicia of Lvov in that same era, and he, in his sefer, he writes a tshuva to Reb Mendele Medesh. He saw his sefer, and he responds. And Rabbi Yitzchak Aaron Ettinger, Orach Chaim Simen Peches, they do sti gedolim respond, and Rabbi Yitzchak Aaron Ettinger apologizes. I know you dreamed, and you take this very seriously, but I don't think the Balach Elohim is right. And he says that we could build the Mizbeach Betumah. One of the arguments of the Sharei Tzedek is Korban Tzibur Doiche Shabbos and is Doiche Tumah. Asiyas HaMikdash is not Doiche Shabbos. Ein Boinen Beis HaMikdash B'Shabbos. That is clear in the Rambam, Perek Aleph Hilchos Veis HaBechira. It's a Gemara Masechta Shavuos. So if it's not Doiche Shabbos, obviously it's not the Doiche Tumah. And I think it says Shabbos and Tumah are not dependent one on the other. Maybe even though it's not Doiche Shabbos, it is Doiche Tumah. And what is the shtickle pele that these two great Gedolim didn't realize that it's a Tosefta? And this Braisa is also brought in Erevin, Daf Kuf Hey, which is a shtickle pele. So the Tosefta does not deal with the Asiyas HaMizbeach, but the Tosefta does deal Binyan Beis HaMikdash Betumah. And the Tosefta clearly says Mitzvah b'koyanim, ein koyanim, then we use Leviim. Ein Leviim, mitzvah b'Yisraelim. Mitzvah b'Tahirim, ein Tahirim, then we build al yedei Tumeim. And the Tosefta, and what is strange is that the Tosefta is quoted, both in Sifro, but in Erev and Kufhei Omed Aleph. The Rambam brings this, and Perik Zayin, Halacha Chov Gimel Halacha Beis HaBchira. And these two Gedolim weren't aware that we're dealing with the Tosefta. However, the Tosefta speaks about Binyan Beis HaMikdash. Does that include Klei HaMikdash? Brings us back to the very first source I quoted in today's Shiur. According to the Rambam, V'yosi LeMikdash includes the Kalim. And if Chazal darshan a posuk in Tosefta that you could build a Beis HaMikdash b'tumah, that would include the Kalim. According to the Ramban, no. V'yosi LeMikdash is only the building. And maybe the Gezeres HaKosiv you could build b'tumah wouldn't refer it necessarily to the Klei HaMikdash. Maybe the Mizbeach is different. The Mizbeach wasn't a Kli. The Mizbeach is a Mizbach Avonim. So maybe the Mizbeach is part of the Beis HaMikdash. The Ravid says, no, the Mizbeach is a mitzvah b'fnei atzmoi. So things start to get complicated. But Rabbi Yitzchak An Ettinger, Shuvas Mario Alevi, has a beautiful raya, and that's a spark of genius. And he says, how did the Chashmonaim build a Mizbeach? It is clear that they built a Mizbeach because there's a Mishnah in Masechet Midos. There was one of the Lishkos in the Azora, Sham henichu avonim avnei hamizbeach sheshikzu hayavonim. The Avonim desecrated the Mizbeach, and the Chashmonaim took the avnei hamizbeach aside, and there was a special lishka designated for avnei hamizbeach hakedoshim that was built al yedei Shlomo HaMelech. And Chanukah is all about Chanukah's HaMizbeach. That Chanukah's HaMizbeach is a new Mizbeach that they built. How did they build a Mizbeach if they were Tmei Meis? They were Tmei Meis. Im Timtze Loimer, that they built the Mizbeach after they were purified, 7 days, Hazos Shlishi Vishvi, and Tfilah B'mikveh. No, they lighted the menorah. And you cannot light the menorah. The Eisha menorah needs to come from the marocha in the Mizbeach. Kimavua biyumedaf memhei. The fire to light the menorah comes from the marocha she'al gabe Mizbeach hachitzon. And it is all clear in Rambam, Perek Gimel Halacha Yud Gimel Mitmidin v'Mesofen. So the Chashmonaim lighted the menorah. And they did it immediately, before they could have Shemen Tohor. And that was the miracle that they found Shemen Tohor, but it was only limited, only for 1 day. So they couldn't purify new oil because they were still Tmei Meis, and they lighted the menorah. And you cannot light the menorah only from the Eish Marocha Shel Gamei Mizbeach. So it's obvious that the first thing they did is to build a new Mizbeach, even before they lighted the menorah, because to light the menorah they needed the Mizbeach. So how did they build the Mizbeach when they were Tmei Meis? And this proves that you could build the Mizbeach at Tumah. And just like Hakrovas Korbanos is Doichet Tumah, Sias Binyan HaMizbeach is also Doichet Tumah. And I find this to be a fascinating and interesting raya. So this was a major discussion which came up again and again, La'orech HaGolus. And it always reflected the expression of Klal Yisrael's longing to finally come back to Hakrovas HaKorbanos and ultimately to Binyan Beis HaMikdash. We are in Golus, and we hope and pray in every generation HaKadosh Baruch Hu should help. We should be able to restore Hashiva Shavtenika V'Roshoino and Shi'abona Beis HaMikdash B'mheira V'yameinu V'sechel Keinu B'Seiro Secho. So today we spoke about the mitzvah of Yossi Lemigdosh V'Shulchanti B'Soichom and some interesting halachas regarding the various different attempts to be Machadash Korbanos. In Mechasosha and Vayikra, ultimately I brought some Soif and the Chasam says it all needs to be Al Pi Navi. And we will only be able to be Makav Korbanos when a Yisrael will be Mishpord, Liachar, Tchias HaMeisim, and it all needs to be like in the days of David HaMelech, Al Yedei Navi. So, for the time being, all we could do is just daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, hope and pray, Mehero Yabona Beis HaMikdash. Today is Chodesh Adar. Mishenachnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha. Minchas Osher Kloli HaMitzvahs. There's a very unique siman about Simcha. How, when, and are Jews happy? Ha'im, matai, ve'ech, anachnu smechim. I don't recall the exact number, but I think I brought 15 different gedorim of Simcha. How do we rejoice? In many ways. Simchas Yom Tov is all about achilas bosa v'shtiyas yayin. But ein simcha leva bosa v'yayin. Purim, chai v'nish levesumei, and that is Simchas Purim. Simchas Beis HaSha'eva, the Rambam writes, that was the greatest simcha of the entire year. Ein achila v'shtiyah ba'azora. Totally different. Dancing. And tricks. Ba'alulim. That is Simchas Beis HaSheva. Simchas Chosam V'Kala. Two different topics. L'sameach Chosam V'Kala is similar to Simchas Beis HaSheva. Sudas Chosam V'Kala is similar to Simchas Yom Tov. Simchas HaTorah. How do we rejoice with Torah? Learn, and you will experience the greatest simcha one could experience. Many different manifestations and expressions of simcha. But the bottom line, a Jew always needs to be happy. So Hasidim say in the name of the Rishon Tzaddik Rabbi Sol Meruzhin, he said, a yid is always besimcha. It's just a question of volume. Marbim, mematim. So, there are more, of less. But you always need to be besimcha. It's just a Zerach Shelah Shel Rama. It's just a question of volume. How much simcha? How could we not be besimcha? Even in the most difficult of times, we are HaKadosh Baruch Hu's chosen people, and out of the billions walking this earth, Ki atem hama'at mekol ha'amim, we are a small people. We were never meant to be a people of many. We are small, we are few, but we are HaKadosh Baruch Hu's chosen people. And to be a chosen people is not only a privilege, it's a responsibility. We were supposed to be, we are designated to be by the Novi or Legoyim. It is a responsibility, not only a privilege. All the others get away with Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, which boil down to just be a mensch. Just be a mensch. Kadosh Baruch Hu doesn't expect much more than that. Don't rob, don't steal, don't kill. Just be a mensch. We can't get away with Sheva Mitzvahs. We have 613. What a leap from 7 to 613. Mi yochal lamoid b'kol eila, said Chazal. And many times when I speak about this, I say, Chevra, if you think 613 is a lot, we have much more than 613. Because the Minchas Osha says, Rotzoin HaTorah, there are many more mitzvahs, which are the Uraisa, not included in the list. Because Taryag mitzvahs is only tzivuyim, commands. But there are many more mitzvahs that we learn from Torah Hashem, which are not included in the list. And we're happy. We're happy because we are HaKadosh Baruch Hu's family. We are bonim l'mokim. Mishenechnes od amar ben besimcha, and in that siman, in Minchas Osher Kloli HaMitzvahs, I try to define, so how does this simcha manifest itself? We don't find. Purim, clearly defined. The Rambam writes, you need to eat basar Purim. And that's a chiddush that we do not find in the Gemara clearly. The Rambam is based on a few stories that we do find in the Gemara. Amirom sent meat. If there's no mitzvah to eat meat, why did they send meat from Mishloach Monos? Marben besimcha. And sometimes simcha is not clearly defined. We are happy because Chodesh Odo was an amazing Chodesh. V'nahafoich hu. And a Minchas Osher Sichas al Moyadim, what I quoted before is the Lamdish said in the Sichas. I wrote, what is unique about Purim is V'nahafoich hu. Everything that seemed to be a terrible gzeira, at the end of the day, those very same events proved to be part of Yeshua's Hashem. Haman was so happy that the Goyder fell on Chodesh Adar. That is the month in which Moshe Rabbeinu passed away. He was sure it's a bad omen for the Jews. He wasn't aware that that is the month Moshe Rabbeinu was born. And it's a wonderful month for the Jewish people. We try to imagine when Haman built that skyscraper, Chamishim Amos, and probably it was seen from the entire town. Wherever you walked, you couldn't escape it. And when the Jews went out of the house in the morning and they saw that 50 Amos, and they knew what it's for, probably they just couldn't look. They closed their eyes. They couldn't lift their eyes and see that Eitz Gavoya Chamisha Mamo. And at the end of the day, those that were hung there were those very same people that tried to destroy and to kill us. That crazy king brings together tens of thousands of women and girls to fulfill his insane tithes. And the only one chosen is Esther. Was a Bas Yisrael Kedoisha v'Tahora, growing in the home of the Gadol Ador of Mordechai. We could just try to imagine what heartbreak that brought among the people. How could this be? Statistically, it's crazy. It's impossible. And the only one that made every effort not to be appealing was Esther. All the others, Psomim, Tamruke, Noshim, Shem, and Amar, and the only one that didn't want anything to do with it was Esther. And she is the one chosen by that crazy king, Achashverosh. Didn't take long till everybody realized that this is Yad Hashem, and this is this amazing Hashgocha Protis. Midas Hadin is Nefach Lerachamim. And that is what the story of Purim is about, and that is what is unique about the story of Purim. So the Shulchan Aruch writes, Tzorech livrois es ha-Megillah ki igeres laharois haneis. When we read in the Sefer Torah, it's a scroll, and all you see is the parsha in which we're reading. Shulchan Aruch writes the minig by Megillah is no. It should be open, spread out. Ki igeres laharois haneis. And nobody explains how does this show the nace. Maybe the Shulchan Aruch should say laharois ha-Megillah. Everybody should see the Megillah. Spread it out, it's more visible, it's more obvious. What is laharois haneis? My understanding is, if it would be possible, Chazal would be metaken that we need to read the entire Megillah b'neshima achas. But it's impossible. Because we get to Vaizosa, we try to squeeze them in b'neshima achas. So the Seres B'nei Haman, we read b'neshima achas, which is an effort. Because when you read the Megillah, and you read every segment in itself, you don't grasp, you don't understand the story, and you don't see the nace. To really appreciate the nace, you need to read the entire Megillah from beginning to end and realize this amazing phenomena. Every Midas Adin is Nefach L'Rachamim. Every event that seemed to be a manifestation of Midas Adin, a terrible Gezeira, v'nehafoichu. That is the special story, the unique story about Nes Purim. And that is what the Shulchan Aruch means. Spread it out. Do your best. Read it without any hefsek. Kedei laharos hanes. People should be appreciative. Because Purim is the only Nes we remember that was totally in the realm of natural phenomena. Sholosh Regalim were supernatural events that had no explanation at all in natural phenomena. Seres Hamakas, Kriyas Yamsef, Mamed Har Sinai. The world has never seen and never will see miracles like those. Even Hanukkah, there was the Pach HaShemen, which was L'mala Mederech HaTeva, above and beyond the realm of nature. Purim, everything was natural. But you need to be blind not to realize everything was miraculous. And those are the Nisim HaNistorim Shehem Yesoid Kol HaTorah Kulo, as the Ramban writes in the end of Parshas Boi. And that is why the Nes of Purim is so important as a message for the later generations, as a message of our time. So nobody knows where this war is going. It's not over yet, even though there is somewhat of a ceasefire. Nobody knows. But these past 15 months were profound. On one hand, profoundly tragic, profoundly sad. We have lost thousands of young people. On Simchas Torah and sin Simchas Torah, thousands of young soldiers, many of them B'nai Torah and Talmidei Chachomim, all of them precious Yiddish neshamas, each and every one of them. So many broken families that will never be the same. Thousands upon thousands of badly injured soldiers, and I know so many of them and so many of the families, and they still are hostages. So these 15 months were profoundly tragic and sad, Hashem Yerachem, also profoundly uplifting. And we saw Nisim. You have to be blind not to see the Nisim, just like in the days of Purim. I said many times in the past few months how wonderful it would be if there would be breaking news in all the news outlets. Unbelievable. All the waters in Gaza and Lebanon suddenly turned red, and nobody could explain what happened. And all the waters became blood. And that would be a far greater item than the walkie-talkies and the beepers. This everybody would talk about it. And the world would still be reeling. And a week later, breaking news once again. 1 billion frogs sprang out of every little ditch, every little pond in Gaza and in Lebanon. They overran the country, disrupting everything, communications, transportation, everything is disrupted. And not one frog crossed the Lebanese border and the border of Gaza. Not one frog. It didn't happen. And it probably won't happen. Because the HaKadosh Baruch Hu said in his Torah, in later generations, we are not zeicha to see Seres Hamakos. Won't happen. But you need to open your eyes and your mind and your heart to see Chazdei Shemayim and to see the miracles that we have been seeing. The natural miracles. 15 months of war. I'm not a military man, but I'm also not a battlan. And I usually know what I'm talking about. This is information I don't like to speak about in public, but about 2.5 years ago in my house, we came together, a group of commanders and people from the Rabbanut HaTzva'it, and we're discussing halachic shaylos about temporary burial. And they said, we know that the Hezbollah has more than 200,000 rockets and drones, and if a war will break out in the north, we could expect a horrendous number of casualties every day. I can't say a number because this is confidential, but a horrendous number. And they said, We cannot process that number of casualties. We will need to do mass burial, and we discussed various shilas. It has happened, and tens of thousands of rockets hit Israel and hit the north. And the number of casualties was so amazingly low, defying any expectation and any assessment of what would happen. And the same regarding casualties in war. Urban warfare is the most horrible type of war. And I read an article about a great military strategist, and he read the number of casualties we experienced is about a sixth of any other place in the world which we are familiar with urban warfare. Those are miracles. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has been watching over us. We are Jews, so to us, everyone is one too many. Everyone is one too many. Every broken family, and every fallen soldier, and every civilian that is killed by terror attacks, and we are under a wave of terror. Each one is one too many. In our Torah, we believe in v'chai bohem, v'lo yishayamus behem. But these are miracles, and as Kodesh Baruch Hu is watching over us. Shomi Yisrael hina lo yonum v'lo yishon. So on one hand, this was a profoundly sad and tragic year, also uplifting. And we see, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is watching over his people, over his precious and beloved children. And as we come into Chodesh Adar, the Sfas Emes says that every year in Chodesh Adar, there is a hisoidus of the Zgula v'nafochu asher yishlut v'Yehudim heimu b'seineim. And it is a special time in which we could once again experience v'nahafochu asher yishlut v'Yehudim heimu b'seineim. So we need to daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, want to hope and to pray that we will see Nisim and Aflois. So the Ramo writes, if you forgot Yalav Yavoy, you forgot Alanisim. And we don't bench again. If we forget Alanisim, we don't daven again. But one should say, Hu Rachamon, Hu Yasa Lano Nisim V'Neflois Keshem Shosiso La'avoseinu, B'yom HaMehemu B'zman Hazeh. B'yom HaMehemu B'zman Hazeh we saw Nisim. No, we didn't see Dam Tzvardeya Kinim. We didn't see Borad and Choshech, but we saw Nisim. What we witnessed is Midas Adin that is Nefach L'Rachamim. What we witnessed is Chazdei Shamayim B'derech HaTeva. And let us end today's Shiur with this very same tefillah. Hu Rachamon, Hu Yasalonu, Nisim V'Neflois Keshem Shosiso La'avoseinu, B'yom HaMehem U'B'zman Hazeh. We should be zeicha to see miracles, and we should be zeicha b'kora b'yameinu. Today we spoke about Binyan Beis Hamikdash. We should be zeicha b'kora b'yameinu, maheri yabona Beis Hamikdash, u'v'nei Yerushalayim yira kodesh b'mahero v'yameinu, v'sham navadcho b'yiro ki yamei olam u'cheshonim kadmoini yois b'bias Moshiach tzedkeinu b'mahero v'yameinu. Amen.